So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us and for coming out to our session for the Yukon Permanent Art Collection tonight. It's great to be able to join together as we were talking about in this virtual space, even though we can't be together in person, but it's great that we can come and join together from all different places. So we're going to be presenting about the Permanent Art Collection tonight. I'll do some intros to start first. So we're joined by Kari Tangadal from Dawson, who is a board member of the Friends of Yukon Permanent Art Collection, and Genevieve Gagnon, who's currently the acting president of the Friends of Yukon Permanent Art Collection. And I'm Garnet Muthing. I'm the art curator for the Department of Tourism and Culture for Yukon Government. So we're joining you from the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Ta'an Council here in Whitehorse. And Kari is joining from the traditional territory of the Trondek in Dawson City. So we're going to talk about the background of the collection so that you have some context into the history and the way that the collection has been formed and developed over the years. We're going to talk about the way that we present and promote the collection so that people can engage with it. We're going to show you a lot of the amazing art that we have in the collection. And then we're going to talk about all of the elements of putting in an application for the call for submissions. And we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. As I said, if you have any questions as we're going through the content, please feel free to enter them into the chat or to raise your hand, and we'll stop and answer those questions for you. So I wanted to talk a little bit further about who I work for within Yukon Government. So within the Department of Tourism and Culture, I work for the Cultural Services Branch and the Arts Section. The Arts Section has the Visual Arts Program, which is what I run. And then we also have arts advisors that run all of the funding programs that we oversee. So those are programs like the Advanced Artist Award, the Touring Artist Fund, and Arts Fund. And we also partner on running Culture Quest and the Cultural Industries Training Fund, as well as a few other funding programs. So if you have any questions on funding, those are the folks to go to. It's Suki Wellman, Katie Newman, and Kaylee Steele. And then my team is the visual arts team. It's myself, the art curator, Erin Corbett, who is our visual art project coordinator, and Tamika Knudsen, who's the visual art collections coordinator. So as a team, we oversee the Permanent Art Collection and all of the other government-owned collections. We take care of the government's public art, and that includes looking after commissioning projects as well. One of the recent projects that we did was all of the public art commissions for the Whistle Bend Continuing Care Facility. So you might have seen some of those pieces if you have visited Whistle Bend. We also oversee the conservation of all of the Yukon government artworks. So that's everything from simple treatments like framing and protection of work all the way up to major in-depth conservation treatments on public sculptures and works of art. And then we also oversee the craft strategy programs. So that includes things like information sessions and training programs for professional development for visual artists, as well as programs like the Created in the Yukon branding and the Art Adventures Guide. So Jen is going to take you through the background of the collection and talk a bit about the Friends of Yukon Permanent Art Collection and how they're involved.
Great, thanks Garnet. It's good to get a refresher on all the great things that the art section does at YG. So YPAC, which is kind of the abbreviated name for the Yukon Permanent Art Collection, was created in 1981. So that means that this year is actually our 40th, the 40th anniversary of the Yukon Permanent Art Collection. So it's a pretty big year. And Garnet, you may mention this a little bit later on, but I know that Garnet and her team have been hard at work installing at the Yukon Art Center for a show that will open next Monday. And I think Garnet was saying there's over 80 works, including the acquisitions from last year. So it'll be a really exciting show and probably something really great to check out just as a curious artist and keener for arts and culture in the Yukon, and probably would give you a pretty good sense of a big selection of works from the collection. And the YPAC is really meant as a record of the visual arts in the Yukon. And we'll review what we kind of look for as part of the call for submissions in the selection process. But we're really interested in having a diverse representation of all different kinds of artistic practices in the territory. It's meant for Yukoners, so people who live here, people who visit here also, and artists as well. So, you know, we hope that YPAC is a way to support artists financially and also showcase and highlight all of the beautiful practices and work that's created here. And I'm biased in saying this, but I really do believe that the arts, you know, improve our well-being as individuals and as communities. So yeah, we're pretty happy to be able to care for important pieces and ensure that they're properly stored and cared for, and do our best to kind of share them with the community. Some of the activities that YPAC engages in are exhibitions. So typically there's an exhibition of the annual acquisitions. And so that will be for this year opening on December 6th, in less than a week. And then sometimes there's also special exhibitions, exhibitions that are, you know, there's partnerships with other local organizations. We also do artwork loans. So sometimes YPAC will receive requests for loans it's happened for entire exhibitions or as part of other exhibitions, whether that's locally or nationally or even internationally. So always exciting to see pieces from YPAC be shown elsewhere outside the territory. And again, that kind of brings visibility to those pieces and to the artists. YPAC also has a rotation program. So I don't know, Garnet, how many locations there are as part of the rotation program.
We
Probably
have
close to
over 30 in Whitehorse. And then we have one location each in Faro, Mayo, Dawson, and Haines Junction. Actually 2 in Mayo.
Cool. Yeah, so that's something else. That's a really great way for the pieces to get out. There's different kinds of locations, from the library to the main administration building, where there's typically like a selection, an exhibition that's on display there, and then continuing care facilities as well. So yeah, that's a really neat program. And then another activity that YPAC does is to create opportunities for engagement and interpretation of the pieces.
Next slide.
Yes, please. Great, thanks. So Friends of Yukon Permanent Art Collection is the board that Kari and I sit on. For short, we refer to it as FOIPAC, and FOIPAC was formed in 1979. Its purpose initially and on an ongoing basis, in part, is to do some fundraising to support the collection and also advocacy. And so, you know, different kinds of advocacy activities might be, for example, advocating to different parties for adequate storage space. We also might kind of spread the word about new acquisitions or special activities. So we have a website. So another way that we try and support the collection by kind of shining the light on it. FOIPAC also has engaged in art acquisitions, I guess, for 40 years. And it was part, Garnet, correct me if I'm wrong, or FOIPAC was also a part of establishing the Yukon Permanent Art Collection.
Yes.
Kind of played a role in starting that for the territory. And then in 2000,
yeah.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I was just going to say they did, and it was actually Yukon government came on board a couple of years down the road. So
Okay.
they were fundamental in forming the collection.
Okay, so initially it was, okay, great, I didn't know that. And then I guess since 2008, FOIPAC has been running an annual call for submissions process and running a selection committee. So FOIPAC acts as an arm's length selection committee. We're composed of members of the community. We have representation from rural Yukon communities and Whitehorse as well. Different, we try to be a diverse group with different kinds of areas of expertise, different interests, different backgrounds. And it's kind of our most exciting time of the year. Feels like a really big gift to receive the call for submissions and to review them as a group. So we do that in partnership with Yukon government, but ultimately we are the jury that selects the new acquisitions. There's a couple quotes there, and there's some photographs of two lovely artists, Gertie Tom and Anne Smith, who both have pieces in the collection.
Thanks, Jen. So I wanted to give you a better idea of what we have in the holdings of the collection at this point. As Jen mentioned, we're 40 years into creating and developing this collection. And a number of years back, we decided to start trying to track exactly what was in the collection in terms of some statistics to help us see how we were reflecting the community and if there were gaps that we needed to be working on filling. So one of the most general ways that we looked at those kinds of overviews of the collection was the division of two-dimensional versus three-dimensional artwork. So 2D being things like drawings, photographs, paintings, 3D being sculpture, sewing, carving, and those kinds of items. So as you can see, it's almost an even distribution with some categories of others for things like installation and things that are a bit difficult to categorize. And we have some indication of the makeup within those categories of different types of work like painting, photography, and different types of sewing and carvings. As you can see, we have over 500 works in the collection now, and we have over 275 artists represented. Another way that we look at the collection is in terms of the subject matter. As I go through these slides, I just want to sort of put the disclaimer forward that obviously categorizing artwork can be difficult and fraught. So we do our best in order to give us a sense of what we have in the collection and for the purpose of making sure that we're addressing gaps and focusing on different art forms, for example, that we might want to be adding, different communities that we want to be representing. But these categories, there's a lot of overlap in them, I guess is what I'm saying, because artwork doesn't neatly fit into one category versus another very often. But it is useful to look at. So some of the categories we've come up with are First Nation traditional work that references past traditions or innovating based on those traditional forms that have been passed down. Landscape figurative, abstract portrait, functional. And then we have a category for First Nation contemporary, public art, and photo documentation. This slide gives an overview of the gender division within the collection. So it's interesting, when we first went back to track this, one of our motivations was the fact that through a lot of public collections across Canada, they're finding that the work has been very male dominated, which I think is fair to say is a reflection of the art world historically in Canada. So our collection being younger, but I think also it's a reflection of the community here, has never actually been dominated by male identifying versus female identifying artists, which is interesting. And actually now we've come to a point recently where female artists make up more of the collection than male artists. So you can see how that division works. And then about 6% of either unknown, unstated, non-binary or collaborative works between female and male identifying artists. This is looking at the community representation in the collection. So we always want to be making sure that we're collecting work and representing different types of art practice and art forms in all of the different communities of the Yukon. As you can see, we definitely have some work to do in this area. So it's something that we're always striving to try and make sure that we're addressing. So some of the ways that we're doing that are through community visits. When we go out to do rotations of artwork in the communities, I try to have as many meetings and studio visits with artists as I can and talk about the collection, what we're doing, and invite people to apply. We're also working with partners in the communities that can help connect us with artists who they think might want to apply to the collection, so that we make sure that people are aware of this opportunity and of the supports that we offer. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit more later on. Now we're going to show you some artwork. So this is a good selection of works from earlier years in the collection, more recent works. And I just wanted to show you a really good diversity of what the holdings are, because we are always trying to encourage people and to let everyone know that we're inviting artists from various stages in their career in all different art forms to apply. And so I hope that these slides will give you an idea of what we have in the collection and the diversity of what we're trying to represent. So on the left, we have a piece called What Are You Up To Next by Ray Ledoux from 2017. And this piece was donated by Jim Robb, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So Jim has a pretty astounding collection of Yukon historical artifacts and documentation and artwork, and is a huge champion of Yukon artists, a lot of them the lesser known artists. So Ray is somebody who doesn't typically show his work in galleries or his own shows, but Jim has been collecting his work over the years and chose this work from his own personal collection to donate to us. So Ray was involved in that donation and is really happy that his work has come into the collection. And he is a Casca artist from Ross River. On the right, we have Gordon Ryder, Business Owner from 2016 by Pam Van Kampen. Pam is an amazing portrait artist. And what I really love about this piece is if you know Gordon Ryder and his business, this is such an amazing representation of it. It just gives you the feel of walking into that space and this old family run business. It's pretty amazing. The other really nice connection with this piece is that the painting on the window behind Gordon was done by Doreen Hildebrand. She used to do all of the rendezvous painting on downtown businesses. And she sadly passed away. She was somebody who was really central to the arts community and passed away suddenly. And so Gordon has always left her painting on his window as a way to honor her. So this is a nice connection to another artist in the community whose work we also have in the collection. Here on the left, we have Tucho Addo's Stick Gambling at Coffee Lake by Mary Caesar. Mary's a Casca artist from Liard First Nation. And as you can see, she does these beautiful representations of cultural activities in her community at some of the really important settings and locations that they go to for these activities. We have a number of works by Mary in the collection that reflect her own personal experiences, and the way that she depicts them is really quite amazing. On the right, we have Drawn Into Evavik by Jane Isaacson. So you can see that Jane she creates stunning landscapes, and she works in a lot of abstraction and geometry into them. There's a lot of conceptual exploration that goes on behind Jane's practice. And this is a piece that she created after doing a residency in Evavik in Northern Yukon. So it's also a really beautiful representation of a place that not many of us are probably going to get to visit in person. Showing some of the 3D works that we have in the collection. On the left is Dennis Shorty, Floatplane LP 282 from 2017. This was a really important work to Dennis. Most of the other pieces that we have in the collection by him are carved antler. This is one that he created from memory, trying to recreate a floatplane toy that his father had made him when he was young, that he could remember having. But it also represents the float planes that came and took children from his community to residential school. And the number LP 282 was the number that he was assigned when he went to residential school. So an extremely significant personal narrative for Dennis in this piece. On the right, we have a ceramic vessel by Luann Baker Johnson from 2009. This is called Brick Stability. And this is one of the new acquisitions for this year that we're showing for the first time in the exhibition that Jen mentioned earlier. So this piece was created by Luann when she was grieving the death of one of her children. And the process of creating this vessel through hand-formed bricks was part of her process. In her statement about the piece, she talked about the way that the vessel responded to the firing process by partially collapsing but still standing, and how she felt that that represented her state and what she was in her own grieving. Another pretty powerful piece. Some of the sewing that we have in the collection. On the left, we have Alaska style dancing slippers by Marla Charlie from 2021. So this is obviously one of the new acquisitions for this year, and an absolutely beautiful example of Old Crow beadwork. You can just see the tradition and the perfection that Marla's sewing reflects from that community. Old Crow artists are known for their beadwork. It's pretty legendary. So we're thrilled to have a new pair of slippers in the collection that are unlike any other style that we had represented so far. On the right, this is the wedding jacket by Shosho Esquiro from 2013. Shosho is internationally renowned. She's a Casca artist who now lives in Vancouver. Was born and raised in the Yukon, and we have 2 of her pieces in the collection. She was one of the finalists for the Yukon Prize. And this piece, you can see she's done hand painting on the interior of the jacket of flying ravens. On the outside, she has tufting on the right side of the jacket and Arctic fox around the collar. Pretty beautiful piece. And just so you know, it's going to be in the exhibition at the Yukon Art Center, so you have a good opportunity to go see it in person. Some of the metalwork that we have in the collection. On the left, this is Caribou Flagon by David Ashley from 2011. This is a piece that he created when he was interested in investigating circumpolar connections through legend. So the imagery and the form of the cup reflect those explorations. On the right, this is How to Ride a Narwhal by Donald Watt from 2019. And this is a piece that we collected. An interesting story, since Donald, he's very well known as being a snow carver. He's also a sculptor. He works in ceramics, and he started to have his work cast in bronze. And so I found it to be a really interesting contrast that we were collecting this work. This was a maquette for one of his team's snow sculptures, and has now been formed in something that's so completely permanent as a representation of an art form that's probably one of the most ephemeral types of art that you can create. So this is a maquette for a sculpture that they created for a competition in Italy when they were imagining a scenario of a kayaker kayaking amongst a pod of narwhals and then having to ride one to shore after he capsized. On the left, we have Ornate Gold Pan by Colin Dorward from 2014. What I love about this piece is the contrast with the kind of well-known Yukon gold pans that everybody's familiar with that show beautiful Yukon landscapes. So this one is a play on that tradition where it shows a different kind of Yukon landscape. This is a dump or a waste disposal site. And I just love the way that Colin painted this with such amazing texture. It feels really 3D when you're looking at the way that he's painted it in the gold pan. On the right, we have Howl with the Wolves by Sarah Burwash from 2012. Sarah's an artist from Eastern Canada who did a residency in Dawson and created this piece in response to her time here. So residency is also something that we're really interested in tracking and documenting in the collection because it has such a big impact on the community here, whether it's Yukon artists leaving and doing residencies in other places or people coming here and collaborating and having their own impacts with the community. The piece on the left is another one of the new acquisitions for this year. This is by Justine Sonoa Wood, and it's called Mountain Spirit. So this is a piece that Justine made reflecting her concerns and her ideas about climate change. So on the top of the headband, you can see the message "climate change is real" beaded. And she created the headband out of almost all repurposed materials. So the rabbit fur on the top is repurposed. Within the beadwork design, she's incorporated all kinds of objects. There's plastic bags in there, cigarette butts, CDs, an old pair of jeans. The list is pretty long. So it's amazing how beautifully she was able to render those objects and create such a stunning piece, but it's a pretty powerful message that she's portraying as well. On the right, we have Abstract Portrait Mask by Mark Preston from 2016. This is a really nice piece because it shows Mark's progression with what he's exploring. We have some of the very earlier work of his in the collection from much earlier in his career. And it also shows the different way that people are working with mask traditions and also with form line and those really set traditions that are present in carving. And Mark is taking them to a whole other level of simplicity and abstraction. Couple of pieces incorporating antler and different types of art forms. So on the left, we have Hints of Easter by Faye Chamberlain, who's an artist based in Dawson. Tufting is something that we have been striving to have more of in the collection for a number of years, because we could see with those statistics that we were keeping that it was an underrepresented art form. So we were really thrilled to have this submission from Faye come in this past year. As you can see, her execution is amazing and her designs are vibrant and beautiful. So we're very excited to bring this piece in. On the right, another piece incorporating antler, but in carving this time. This is Maureen Morris, who is an artist based in Atlin. And what I love about Maureen's story, we have a number of her works in the collection too. She's somebody whose career we've been tracking. And so Maureen moved to Atlin and was a jade carver at the time and kept seeing moose antlers lying around in her neighbor's yard and felt like it was a readily available, abundant material. So she decided to try carving it as an experiment and loved it so much that she never went back to jade carving. I'm going to let Jen talk about the rest of the artwork.
Okay, thanks, Garnet. Feel free to hop in if I'm missing important pieces of information. You know these work so intimately, so it's always great to hear you speak about them. These two pieces have a connection to Dawson, so as evidenced by the title of the piece on the left by Justin Appley, called A Dawson Dream. And this piece was acquired in 2020, I believe, but it's an earlier piece by Justin, just as he was graduating from the Yukon School of Visual Arts. So maybe an earlier kind of work as part of this artist's career. And we're really interested in tracking development over time. So yeah, it's a really beautiful, pensive piece. And on the right, we have I'd Rather Be Snow Shoveling, Before and After by Hannah Jickling and Valerie Sellez. I don't know that I pronounced her last name properly. That's a piece from 2004. I really love this piece personally. It's a photo documentation of a performance art piece where Valerie and Hannah shoveled snow in different public locations in Dawson, and did so in a really creative, unconventional way to kind of invite people to reflect on public space and the potential within how we inhabit public space. And I think it's just a really playful piece. And this was also acquired in 2020. So another kind of example of returning to earlier works and wanting to have a record of that in the collection. I think we can go to the next one, Garnet. Thanks. I don't know tons about these two pieces. The one on the left is by Kitty Smith, who's a really important Kwanlin Dun First Nation artist who was born in 1890. And this piece is from 1940. I think we've got a few other pieces by Kitty in the collection, and a selection of them, or maybe all of the pieces that we have in the collection, were loaned to the Kwanlin Dun Cultural Center in 2017 when there was a showcase of carvings by Kitty Smith. Yeah, so I think that's an example of preserving historically significant pieces and ensuring that they're properly cared for over time. And yeah, also an opportunity to share them with the general public. Garnet, I don't actually know much about the piece on the right, other that it's incredibly beautiful and intricate, but perhaps you can speak to it briefly here so we can honor it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So these mitts were donated by a collector who had purchased them in the 1970s, and she did wear them, so they're used, but I think she always kept them safe and then had them displayed in her living room, like in a cabinet, because she really felt like she wanted to preserve them. She knew how special they were. So when we brought them into the collection, we didn't know who the artist was, but through one of the staff people here at Tourism and Culture, Gary Najutli, we were able to contact family of his in Old Crow, and we found out that they were made by his grandmother, Joanne Najutli, who in the 1970s did a ton of beadwork and also had the contract to create all of the sewn goods and beadwork for the RCMP. So she was a very, very well-known beader. And as you can see, the details on these mitts are unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I hear that from so many people we show them to.
This is the last slide that we have for you tonight of different examples of works. The one on the left is by Jeffrey Langille. Not sure I pronounced his last name properly either. It's called Second Avenue, Dawson City, January 2017. I just love this piece. Just such a beautifully rendered photograph of this moment in time. And it looks cold, and it just feels very iconic of Dawson, and just the way the light is reflected off the windows. So there's some really lovely details, in my opinion, in that piece. And then on the right, I think Jeffrey, was Jeffrey a faculty at SOVA? Yes, okay. He still is, okay. And then on the right, a piece from Janine Frater-Jutley from 2013, kind of bringing in some visual elements of traditional and contemporary First Nations culture. I think it's a really interesting piece. I actually don't know too much about it. Janine was a finalist for the Sobey Art Award in 2018, so 5 years after this piece was acquired. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add about that one, Garnet.
I think I would just add the style of the parka in this piece is reflective of fashion work that Janine was doing at the time. And they're a multidisciplinary artist. They do performance work, sound, and so I really am glad that we've captured this element of their work at that point in their career, because they're an artist who is evolving and exploring immensely. So I hope that we're going to bring more of their work into the collection. So Jen talked a little bit earlier about the rotation program. So I wanted to show a couple of slides that give examples of the locations where we have things displayed. What I love about this program is that we're bringing art into people's everyday spaces. So sometimes I think about the staff that work in these spaces and the fact that they get to see and enjoy this work every day. Often it's visitors coming in for business in these spaces, or visitors to the Yukon that have never seen any of these artists before. And I just think that it's a really great way to access a really diverse and wide audience with the collection. One of my favorite parts of the rotation program is installing work at our extended care facilities, because we get so much wonderful feedback. We were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that it's some of the most honest feedback I get about the collection, for sure. And it just feels like we're bringing art into people's everyday environments and enriching those spaces. So it's great to see that we're always adding a couple of new locations to that program every year as the collection grows. Jen also talked about the exhibitions that we do. So every year we have an exhibition that announces the new acquisitions to the collection. And then every few years we partner, often with the Yukon Art Center, to do a larger curated show where we can show off a larger portion of the collection. So on the left, this is Found, Forged, and Fused from 2015. That was the National Year of Craft. So we did all three-dimensional and fine craft examples from the collection for that exhibition. And on the right is the poster for the exhibition that we had representing last year's new acquisitions. It was called Love and It Seems, and it was curated by Erin Corbett. That was at the Yukon Art Center as well. This is the poster for the exhibition that we're working on installing right now at the Yukon Art Center. So that's going to be opening on Monday. It's called Collective Memory, and it's celebrating the 40 years of the Yukon Permanent Art Collection. So what I've done this year is incorporated all of the new acquisitions, and there are more than 20, because last year we had a doubled purchasing budget because of the government support for COVID relief with the arts community. And so we have all of the newest acquisitions and another 60 pieces that I've curated from the earliest years all the way through to the current year in the collection. So we're pretty excited about that. Sadly, we can't hold openings right now because of the state of emergency, but we're hoping that we may be able to do that in January. Regardless, the show is on display for 3 months. So I always encourage people that are thinking about applying to the collection to go and see the new acquisitions and to go and see the other work that we have in the collection. So if you get a chance, I would love it if you could go and see this show. This is an exhibition that we put on for the new acquisitions in 2019, and this one was held at Yukon University. So we try to move around the exhibition with the new acquisitions so that we're always engaging with new audiences. The year before, we had the new acquisitions show at the Learning Center in Carcross, which was really great. These are some examples of projects where we've loaned work out to other institutions. So every year we work with the Attica Festival, and we loan work from the permanent collection for the central displays in their gallery space. But we often loan things for performances and for their fashion show as well. So the image on the left shows Sean Smith wearing a robe and regalia by his mother, Anne Smith. Those are all Raven's Tail. So Anne's Raven's Tail robe is going to be on display in the exhibition that we're opening next week as well. So if you get a chance to see it, her weaving is so incredibly intricate and beautiful. To be able to see it up close is an amazing experience. But the other side of these pieces is that they're meant to be worn and danced and to be seen in motion. And so whenever we have a chance to, we work with the Smith family to have them danced and performed and celebrated. On the right is an image of when we loaned a collection of dog blankets to Harbourfront Centre in Toronto. This was a couple of years ago, and this entire collection of dog blankets was created by the Kwandalung Cultural Centre Sewing Group for the Yukon Quest. They had a ceremonial dog team that started the quest in traditional blankets that year. And so we loaned them to Harbourfront Centre, which was pretty exciting because it was a huge audience that was seeing them, but I also think very likely an audience who had never seen, potentially heard of or thought of a dog blanket before. So it was a really nice opportunity to get this artist's work out. A couple other examples, Jen mentioned the loan of all of the Kitty Smith carvings that we have in the collection to the Kwandalung Cultural Centre. So the image on the left is from that show. And on the right is a loan that went out to the Penticton Art Gallery. I believe it was 2017. And this was a collection of works by Jim Logan called Requiem for Our Children. So they are depicting people's experiences in the residential school system, some really hard and important work in that collection. And so it was a great opportunity to work with the Penticton Gallery to get this collection out for a new audience to see, but in a way that we could provide a context and some care around it. Okay, so we're going to start talking about the process of applying to the collection now, and Kari is going to walk through the different elements of that.
Thank you, Garnet. Hello, everyone. So the deadline this year for applications is January 31st by 4:30 p.m. So this includes descriptions of your completed work. So as you can see, the dimensions, material, the asking price, artist statements, CV and or bio, images, anything else you would like to include. So with the artist statements, we're not expecting any kind of professionalism. This is a tone of your choice. If you want to write in a manner that's creative, that's great. I think what we're mostly looking for is that we can connect to you as an artist and just have some context of your work and an idea of who you are. So also with the images, I wanted to mention that there will be photography sessions happening in both Whitehorse and Dawson. We don't have a date for the one in Dawson yet, but the one in Whitehorse is January 17 and 19 at Garnet. I can't remember where in Whitehorse it is.
They're happening at the Whitehorse Public Library this year in the meeting room space that they have.
Yeah, okay. And personally, I find this pretty important as someone who sits on the jury and looks through many applications at a time. It can be quite distracting if images are not clear, or if there's a distracting background. I would encourage anyone applying just to really focus in on the work and try to take as crisp of an image as you can with a really simple background. The photography sessions are really great, just to have those professional photos of your work. I went to one in Dawson and it was so helpful. So I highly recommend going to that. And also we have a tomorrow night at 6:30, I believe. There's a session on how to develop your bio and your artist statement, and a lot of great tips on how to do that in a way that's effective and concise. And yeah, So that's tomorrow. There's a link that we're probably providing at the end of this.
I can put that into the chat. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And you can register for that online for tomorrow.
Next slide.
Yes, please. So I went over this a little bit with the artist statement and biography. So content can include, for example, for the bio, some information about who you are and also what your experience as an artist and making work has been, why you're making work, what informs what you do, where that inspiration comes from, what you're saying with your work, and also going back to how we look through many applications. I would also encourage to keep both of those pretty concise, because there's a lot of reading that we do. I just think just so we can have an idea of who you are and what you're doing. Yeah, Garnet, would you have anything to add about in terms of the length of the artist statements or bios?
Yeah, in the application form, we have a recommended length for those, and it's, we're not going to exclude any that run over that length, but that recommendation is there for exactly the reason Kari said. The jury reviews a huge volume of material, and it's to help encourage you to really get down to the elements of what you're trying to say, and to really have your voice come through and to talk about your work in a way that feels personal and reflects your own voice.
Mm-hmm. And again, I would highly recommend going to those workshops. I find it so helpful to get feedback from friends of mine who are artists who have a lot of experience writing applications and applying for grants and have an understanding of how to write in this way that is effective. And I'll usually run an application by a few people before I send it, because there's always something that an outside observer will have input in and advice for. So yeah.
Next slide.
Yes, please. So again, content in your artwork statements, why you created it, how you created it, where did this work come from, how does it relate to the bigger picture of your practice and your goals, what has your journey been as an artist, where maybe what were you doing before that led you to the kind of work you're making now. And I think it's really nice to be able to see your journey. That's something that we consider when we're choosing artworks too, is we've purchased pieces from artists in the past, and it's really exciting to then continue to purchase some of their work and be able to have this representation in the collection of your growth as an artist. That's something that I find very exciting in the collection. Next slide. Yeah, I think I've gone over this as well. So in your biography, your personal background, where if you were trained or educated, where did you go to school, if you had any formal training, what exhibitions might you have been a part of, what themes are coming up in your work. Yeah, what is your story? So that goes for the CV as well. I meant to mention that also on our website, on the FOIPAC website, there's resources and links to resources. If you don't get a chance to go to the session tomorrow or the photography session, we do have tips on how to write a strong artist statement, bio, CV.
I just mentioned too, the session tomorrow night with Fiona Ray Clark that we're offering on writing those elements is going to be recorded. And so if you aren't able to attend the session, we will be posting a link to view the recorded session afterwards. And I think we'll probably put that through the FOIPAC website as well as a couple of other places.
That's great. So we don't have, and that date for the Dawson photography session will that be posted on our website as soon as it's known as well?
It'll be posted on the website. We'll put it out through ArtsNet and on Facebook. If anyone would like to be contacted as soon as that information is available, you can send me an email and we'll make sure that you get on the list and get an appointment for it. Go next slide.
Yes. So this is pretty self-explanatory. Any reviews that you've had and written about your work, interviews you've done, articles written about your work that relate to the piece you're applying with, that can be helpful and just interesting for us to see and to learn more about what you're doing. So please feel free to include that if you feel like it would be of interest or significance to what you're applying with.
The final bullet on that slide where we're saying make sure they're relevant, that means that any of these additional materials, if possible, should relate to the actual work that you're submitting. So you know, it would be a little bit too much to put in every review that you've had of every show you've ever had. But if it's related to a body of work that you're pulling from for this submission, then that would be a really good fit for this.
Mm-hmm. So I think in remembering, I mentioned this a couple of times, but where we're noting that, remember that it's a competitive process. For me, that really means just to going back to having a concise description of your work. And if you've been on a jury, you know what it can be like to read many applications, and so it's just nice then when we can see your work and have a description that's your voice, concise, explaining, like we don't want to get lost in over explaining what you're trying to do. But I think that yeah, just take that moment in a concise manner to just express who you are and what your work is and what it means.
Yeah, I think we've seen a range of, you know, people who can explain their work very effectively in about 3 sentences to people who also write a beautiful and really effective statement that's a page long. So I think the key is that, you know, if you don't have a page to say about your work, that's completely fine. But what you are saying should really reflect what you want people to understand about your work and how you feel it would be a fit for the collection. Okay, and Kari mentioned the resources page, so that's a link to it at the bottom. If at any point you want any of these references sent to you, you can contact me and I'll make sure that you have the links. Okay, so Jen is going to talk about the selection criteria that the board uses when they're reviewing the submissions. And this is something that we're sharing for the first time this year because we thought it would be a helpful thing for artists to be able to see as part of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Garnet. And as I think both you and Kari have said, you know, it's a difficult, exciting, beautiful, gut-wrenching process to review all the submissions and then at the end to have to make decisions. And it is competitive. And unfortunately, we can't acquire all of the pieces that all of us think have a place in the collection. So this is a tool that we've been using in order to inform our decisions, and we're sharing it so that we can be transparent about our process, and also in the hopes that it helps inform maybe how artwork statements are written and prepared, and thinking about how the bits that you share about your motivations for creating, you might highlight how your pieces kind of respond to or fit within this selection criteria. So we don't have an expectation. I don't think that it would be right in any way to expect that one piece would fit all of these criteria. But if you feel like there's a particular strength or uniqueness to your piece that speaks to one of these criteria, then we'd for sure be keen to hear about that. So there's kind of two sets of criteria, primary and then secondary criteria that we call. I don't really know if there's one that comes before the other, but they're just different kind of sets of considerations. So the first three main things that we look at are cultural and historical significance, artistic excellence, and fit in the collection. Marie, I'll come back to your question once I'm done reviewing this, if that's okay, but I did see it, or maybe I'll let Garnet answer it. Thank you for your question. So for cultural and historical significance, we're looking for a connection to the Yukon Northern culture, a significant piece of Northern or Yukon history, or an important event. We're also looking for work that has resonance and meaning for Yukoners past, present, and future. So that might appeal to different generations of Yukoners, and that will kind of continue to have an interest over time. We're also really trying to do our best to have representation of different Yukon First Nations in terms of reflecting traditional or contemporary artistic practices. Also, you've seen maybe some examples of this in the examples that we shared from the collection, but pieces that maybe in a new way reimagine traditional materials or techniques, imagery or ideas. So when there's that kind of bridging of traditional practices kind of through a contemporary lens, and then also kind of ways that pieces honor, strengthen traditional artistic practices. In terms of Yukon diversity, we're hoping that the collection is going to contribute to the representation of diverse artistic practices in the Yukon. So as I'm sure you all know, artists are practicing across disciplines and genres. And so we're hoping that the collection captures that. And we're also hoping to capture the beautiful diversity of backgrounds and identities and cultures and communities in the Yukon, both geographically, but also in terms of how folks identify. And so that is something that we think about so that we can fully represent the breadth of the Yukon visual art community. In terms of artistic excellence, we're looking at concept. And so strong visual emotional impact through the artwork, what kinds of unique ideas might the piece be presenting, and how resolved those ideas feel through the artwork is something else that we're looking at. Exploration, risk-taking in terms of challenging existing ideas, contributing or challenging discourses. That's something else that we're for sure considering. This has been mentioned before, under the heading of artistic excellence significance. So that would be us kind of looking at how we're tracking the growth or important changes or new directions in someone's artistic practice. And that's really in the hopes of, again, documenting an artist's development or evolution over time. Quality and technique, so pieces that demonstrate excellent technique and execution. Also, as that technique carries your concept. So there's not one way that we mean excellent, that we mean that excellence should look, but how does that lend itself to kind of communicating the content and the concept of your piece. We're looking at demonstration that there's been lots of effort put into the work, and that shows innovation or exploration in terms of the media or the technique that you're using. And then the third kind of point for the primary criteria is the fit in the collection. So Garnett's mentioned this, you know, the example of, I can't remember his name, but the artwork in the window, that was an interesting connection in terms of documenting, I think it's Doreen Hildebrand's work.
Yeah, Gordon Ryder by Pam Van Kampen.
Yeah, thank you, Garnet. And so, you know, sometimes there's these really exciting connections within pieces in the collection that, well, because we're art geeks, it just gets us going. And yeah, I think we're just looking to kind of complement and strengthen and kind of infuse the collection with like an internal dialogue. So that's something that we look at. And also, as evidenced by some of the stats exercises that we do, you know, I think we all appreciate the arts. And so I don't think statistics is where we love to spend our time. There's a reason to that madness. And it's so that we can really identify where there's certain aspects that might be underrepresented in terms of, you know, geographic communities or different types of representation in the collection. So in terms of fit in the collection, that's something that we consider. For example, tufting was something we were missing for many years. And so there were focused efforts to acquire tufted pieces. And then, yeah, just generally pieces that strengthen or in some way support the collection's mission and mandate. So those are all things to think about. You know, don't create your pieces to respond to these things. That's definitely, we're not hoping to inform what people are making. This is just kind of the matrix that we use to make informed, concerted decisions as a group. And in terms of the other, you know, what we're calling secondary criteria, there's a few things to consider. There's, you know, there's some limitations to the collection. One of them currently is storage space. And so there are some size, some dimension requirements or, you know, kind of limits that that have been specified. I can't remember exactly what they are at this time, but look at
they're in the guidelines.
They're in the guidelines. Yeah. Thanks, Garnet. If you have concerns or you want to discuss with Garnet, she is a very kind person and she'll kind of help you think through those considerations. Another area to consider is conservation concerns. So if you're using non-traditional materials or the piece by Justine Wood that we saw where there was recycled materials and cigarette butts, those might be things that you might want to discuss with Garnet so that she can consult with Val Monahan, who's our conservator at Yukon Government, and kind of get insight from her into what types of requirements would be important considerations so that the pieces can be properly cared for over time. So yeah, I would say definitely I would encourage you to have those discussions with Garnet prior to submitting an application if there's question marks in those areas for you.
Can I just add something there, Jen?
Yeah, of course.
And I think one of the reasons that we encourage you to do that is so that when it comes to the selection committee, all of those questions have been answered, because what can be heartbreaking sometimes is when people respond really strongly to a piece, but there are so many questions about, you know, maybe the materials or the way that we would be able to care for it, that they can't accept it at that point because they just aren't able to make a good call. So I can help you answer those questions ahead of time so that then the selection committee has all of the information that they need to make a good decision.
Yeah, thanks, Garnet. That's important to add. And I think that's for us as a jury, it's a commitment also over time to being able to care for the pieces and display them so that we can honor them and share them with the community. So we do take that responsibility seriously. So it is nice when, as a jury, we've got all those questions covered and we can make sure we can commit to that. So I think that's all I've got to say about the criteria. I think a couple of questions popped up. I don't know, Garnet, if you're okay responding to those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I see one question from Maria Rose, and I'm really glad that you brought this up. It's an important question regarding how other Athabascan peoples and other First Nations fit into the criteria, which honestly, I think was an oversight in the way that we wrote the criteria, because we do have other Northern First Nations represented in the collection. We have several works by Tahltan artists, and we also have some Tetlik-Wichin artists. The mandate of the collection is pan-Northern, so we look for work primarily with Yukon significance, but also Northern and Yukon resonance. And so it's absolutely open to people residing or not in the Yukon and who come from other communities. So definitely, talking about how other First Nations would fit into the criteria, they do. And I think that we need to reword that to say Yukon and Northern First Nations. Does that answer?
Yeah, and I'm thinking,
You had something to add, Jen?
yeah, I was just thinking, I do agree that I think that was an oversight on our part. And I do think we have some works in the collection by Métis artists as well. And
Yes.
so
Yeah, thank you. We
I
do.
think there might be a focus on Yukon First Nations, but it's not for sure limited to. So
yeah.
Great question.
Okay, so I have one more slide, which is mostly a review and reminder of things like the deadline, which is January 31st, 2022. We will be talking, releasing the dates for the photography session soon. There's my contact information. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that my team and I are available for support in completing your submissions. So Jen mentioned consulting with me about specific concerns about conservation, but you can also bring forward elements of your submission for review and feedback if you'd like. If you need help with writing, that's completely fine. We can help with that too. The earlier you can contact us, the better, because leading up to the deadline, it does get quite busy trying to help everyone, but we like to try and provide as much support as we can because we want your application to be the strongest that it can possibly be. And we're trying to address barriers because we know that this process isn't something that kind of feels natural to everyone or that a lot of people have experience with. So please feel free to contact us and just ask any questions that you have or to ask for support at any step of the way, because we're here to do that. So I think I will stop sharing and open it up to questions if people have them. You can just ask the question, or you can use the chat to do that, and we'll get back to you. While we're doing that, I am just going to try and find the link for that the bio and statement writing session so that I can post that into the chat for everybody too. Any comments or questions? You're welcome, Lillian.
That was great. Thank you. And for setting the presentation up and your time, all three of you.
Happy to.
It's always good to listen to the variations of your presentations. I listened to the last one as well. But even if, a sentence or a word fits the puzzle, all the better for it.
Okay, I'm just posting the link to the statement, bio and statement writing workshop. It's a good point, Lillian. I mean, you can express things and discuss different angles of this process in so many different ways. And yeah, it's one of the considerations we had. So we offered a workshop in biography and statement writing last year with Katie Newman, which was amazing, and is also available as a recording on the FOIPAC website under resources, which is what Kari had mentioned earlier. And what we wanted to do this year is to offer another workshop from somebody from a different place. I think Fiona's from Ontario, and through somebody with a different perspective, because there's not one approach to writing biographies and artist statements, and different things work for different people. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where people say, oh, I'm good now. I feel like I'm amazing at writing these things. I don't need any more help. So we're going to keep offering these sessions, and hopefully one of the instructors of the approaches will really speak to you.
All right, I'm going to go now, and thank you, all three of you.
Thanks for joining us, Lillian.
Okay.
Thanks, Lillian.
All right.
I'm leaving me too. Thank you very much, everybody. It was really interesting.
Thank you, Françoise.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Françoise. Bye.
Bye.
Any other questions, Guillaume or Maria Rose?
Yes, I've got a question. When I did the application twice, and something that that was kind of troubling, and I think it's a problem for a lot of artists, is like talking about the price of the artwork. What would you suggest? Because like there's a we don't know, like if you have like how can I phrase that? It's hard to actually like come up with a price when you don't know like the amount of money that you can invest in one specific artist. And like for me that was a trouble, because I submitted like a very large piece, and like the first year I submitted it at a very low price, comparing like if it was into the art market, it would have never gone like with that price. Yep. But I was okay with that. The second year I kind of bumped up the price. I was like, okay, so maybe like this came into consideration, because I know that the price of the artwork can also change the perception of the artwork. So like if you're submitting something at a very low price, like you're like, it's not that good, but like it doesn't mean anything. So would you have any like recommendation towards like this question?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I would note here. So it is difficult, and I completely understand, you know, you feel a bit like you're shooting in the dark without knowing exactly how much we have to spend on each piece. We always reveal the total purchasing budget, and the reason that we don't kind of indicate a minimum or maximum for any one work is because at the end of the day, it depends on how many works of art we buy. So our annual purchasing budget is $30,000. Last year it was 60,000 because the government doubled it for COVID relief. It has gradually been increasing over the years. I think when I first started, it was only 15,000. And so we're hopeful that the budget will get other increases in the years to come. So it really kind of depends on what we receive and the dynamic of how all of those artworks come together and what the priorities are for purchasing that year. I always let artists know that we don't consider price in the first couple of rounds of review and selection. So when the packages go out to the selection committee, they don't see the pricing of any of the work. And that's so that they're responding only to the artwork and not thinking about price at all, because we only want to be looking at the art with those selection criteria in mind and responding to it in that way, and not being preoccupied by whether or not we can afford it and what it would mean for the other pieces that we're purchasing and how it would impact all of those considerations. And so we look at that price maybe 2 or 3 kind of rounds of selections in. So I think it's important to consider that. The other thing I always let artists know is to not feel like they need to try to give any kind of deal to price their art lower than they would for other venues, because it's really important. Jen mentioned earlier that part of the mandate of the collection is financial support to artists, and we don't want artists to be underpaid for their work. It's a really important part of what we do. We don't ask artists to assign any of the copyright to their work when we purchase it. So even if your work is in the collection, you can still use images of your work freely and make profit off those. If anyone else requests to use an image of your work that's in the collection, we make sure that you have a fee negotiated for that. So we don't ever want artists to price it down.
Yeah. And like when I submitted my artwork, like basically like the goal was not to be in the collection per se. The goal was more to have my piece, because I know that you're doing like installation in public spaces, and it was like such a big artwork that it was like it has to go like somewhere, like basically. And like would you consider like type of artwork that are done in that spirit? Because like especially for very large pieces, because I know it's a real trouble like stacking everything and like taking it away, like as you know. And yeah, like like if somebody was to submit a piece that would be like meant to end up like basically in a public building, like in a way, like, because I know that what I submitted was not like meant to be like open and folded, and like would that be something that you will be open to, or I'm not sure my question is clear.
It is, yeah. Unfortunately, the answer isn't super clear because it's impacted right now by the fact that our storage capacity is really minimal. Yep. The storage space that we share with the Yukon Art Center, we've been working with them since the art center was built, and it's beyond capacity. So we're working on plans for building a new storage facility that would share between the collections of paleontology, archaeology, and arts, all of the tourism and culture collections. But that's years down the road. And so in the meantime, we've had to limit the size of works that we can collect simply because we don't have the storage space. If a work is intended to be on long-term public display, it's something else that we could definitely explore. But I would say that if there wasn't already a specific space in mind, it's something that we would have to explore outside the call for submissions, because we just don't have the ability or capacity to store the work while we would try to determine a location for it.
Yeah.
So at this point, it would be better to apply to one of the public art competitions that come up with work like that, and then to the permanent art collection within the size constraints. Although I'm very excited for the day when we won't have to have those size constraints in the call for submissions, and when we have new storage space and can welcome larger works. Because we also recognize that, you know, when artists create large works, they're often really significant to their practice or represent a significant body of work, and we want to have the ability to collect those pieces, as well as the smaller pieces that are more, you know, sort of suited to the everyday spaces in the rotation program that we store work in, or that we display work in. We want to be able to represent both of those types of works in the collection.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And that was very great, like you sharing like what you are looking for. But it's also like very open to interpretation in a way. Yes. So like, do you have like like maybe it's a mandate, maybe it's just like like basically like could you explain like a little bit more like your it's hard to explain, like do you have a vision of what you especially want to collect? Like, because like it's the first time that I'm realizing that you're having like this, okay, we want to collect like this type of work because it means something in this moment of time, or like this type of practice because we don't have much of it. So thank you very much for sharing that. But like, is there like an overall view like for the collection, like a direction that you're taking that is a little bit more specific?
So we do have a more overall view, but it's not very specific because we're trying to reflect practice here, which is evolving all the time, right? So the tricky part of it is that, you know, in the selection committee room, when it's kind of like you don't know until you see it. In some cases we do know, because as I said, with the tufting piece that we collected, we knew that there was very little tufting in the collection. So that was something that we could easily say, okay, so there's not a lot of tufting, there is not a lot of quill work. I'm trying to think of another example. We don't have a whole lot of printmaking at the moment compared to the number of people who practice printmaking. I would say ceramics is another art form that we don't have a huge representation of. But beyond that, it's like somebody did an amazing residency and their work comes in and we can see that that was really significant to them. It may not have been something that we knew about before that, or it could be that a certain artist has decided to explore a new type of subject matter that they hadn't. It's really, it comes down a lot to kind of the strength of the work in connection with the artist's practice. And a lot of those things are kind of hard to define until you see the work, as you know, right? When you see it, you know it.
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe just to add, Garnet, too, I think as a jury, we, and in partnership with your team, we try and identify things that might be underrepresented, but if something comes in as a submission or a proposed donation that we're reviewing as part of the jury process, I don't think that underrepresentation would kind of trump the other parts of the selection process in terms of the criteria we're looking for. So we're not just going to bring in a piece of tufting because it's tufting without considering the other kind of things that we reviewed. So it's balancing all of those things. And there's no real science to it. I think these are guidelines for us too. And we do our best, we make decisions on a consensus basis, but it's never, it's hard because we all have our personal backgrounds and histories. And so I think that's why the criteria is there too, to create a bit of structure around that. But
Okay. I don't know if you're sharing like on your site, like if you're sharing like the location where you're putting like all the artwork when it's a temporary exhibition. Do you do that?
No. It's on our wish list.
Okay, because that would be actually like super nice. So like it's not a surprise and you know where you're going to end up. So maybe that will motivate people who are a little bit shy, like selling their, because I know there's a lot of that here, like people who do like excellent work, but they're like, oh, I'm not there yet. And you're like, you should go. So yeah, I think that will be nice just to know like what are the opportunities if your art gets selected. Yeah.
Oh, so you mean like a list of all the locations where we have it on display?
Yeah, because one day I went to the Yukon College and like that. I don't really remember where it was, but then I discovered that there was like artwork from the Permanent Art Collection there, and I was like, "Ooh, that's a nice location." I didn't know that it was there, and like sometimes even like in spaces that you're familiar with, like you don't like notice that there's actually like something there. So like you could, I don't know, like maybe some artists could actually create something because they've seen like artwork there and that wasn't really noticeable, and they're like, oh, maybe I can do a piece like because like it might end up there and I can do like something like really striking, or I don't know. Yeah, I just think like it would be like motivating for people, like even if it's not staying in that space.
Yeah, that's I didn't understand your question at first, but that would be very easy to do. So I think that's a great idea. What I was meaning was on our wish list is to have some kind of interactive online place that people could go and see exactly which works from the collection are on display in every location. So that's down the road, but just listing the locations that we display the works. Yeah, that's something we could absolutely add to the FOIPAC website. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I just think it will be like a good motivation thing for people, like especially like if you like one space and you're like, oh, what I'm doing, like I don't know, like the public library, for example, like if you have things that are, because my partner is working there and she's like, oh, there's a piece from the Yukon Art Collection that I've never noticed, like and I'm looking at art, like I'm looking for it, right, and I never noticed it. So I'm like, oh, so there might be a problem there, like why didn't I notice it? And I don't know, somebody who is working with words, like a representation of words, like maybe is like, oh, if I have the chance to end up at the public library, like maybe he's going to be motivated to do like.
Yeah. Nice. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, I guess we can wrap up for tonight, but this has been great. Thanks so much for attending, and I hope it was helpful. Like I said, if any other questions come up, or if you need help finding any of the information that we talked about, or with your submission, please feel free to get in touch with me and we can do that.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks for coming. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Take care.